Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about abuse and what it does to people, and we have gone through some things about it. We know it affects the way you think about yourself, the way that you behave, and we've gone through some things. I want to do a very quick review of what we've done so far, and then go into another segment of this. In the abuse, we know that it includes excessive punishment, physical and emotional abuse, verbal abuse, and abandonment. It concerns all of those things, and those things are a terrible thing to go through. What it leads to are false beliefs about yourself, fears about yourself, unhealthy behavior. So I'm going to reiterate a couple of things here that you need to remember. Abuse is never your fault, and I know I'm going to say it over and over again. When I counsel people, young people, children, I always had to review the fact that nobody is responsible for their own abuse. Nobody is at fault. No one has the right to abuse you in any way, and you do not have any responsibility in abuse. So it's not your fault, in other words. And I know people will say, why do you keep saying that? We get it already. You've said it before. But people who are abused don't get it. People who are abused need to be reaffirmed, and they need to be reinforced. The idea is that it's not their fault. I tell children all the time, your parents divorced. It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Some people just don't make it. Some people just can't get along. But it's not your fault. You didn't do anything to cause it. Because a child will always think if their parents split, they did something wrong. They take that responsibility, they take that guilt on themselves, and then they want to do something to get their parents back together because they think they're responsible for the split up, and they're not. So we have to keep reinforcing this. If you've been abused, it's not your fault. There's no equal power base between an abuser and a person who is being abused. So there's nothing that you could have done to stop it, and it's not your fault that it happened to begin with. So I want to just go over some of the things here, the false beliefs, and we've already done this, so I'm just kind of doing a very quick review before we go into the next session. The false beliefs that you're going to have as a result of abuse, if you have been abused, the negative expectations, you don't expect anything good to ever happen to you, and worse than that, you don't think you deserve anything good happening to you. You feel like you're never good enough, you're afraid you're going to be abandoned, you're afraid that you're never going to be wanted. Why would anybody want a person like you? Because you're so flawed. I mean, it just goes round and round and round. You feel you must have control because that control gives you security, and you feel like you don't have the right to make decisions. You want to always be right, and you're not worthy of love or success. Now, all of these things intertwine, and by the way, if you're experiencing those, these are false beliefs about yourself. These beliefs are not true, and you don't have to accept them as being true because they're not. Things happen that are good to you as well as bad. You have to be aware of that. You have to acknowledge that. And you are a worthy person just because you are. You stop to think of it. Why do you love a baby? When you see a baby, your natural inclination is to hold the baby, talk with the baby, play with the baby, make sure the baby is comfortable and well cared for. Why do you love a small child? Why do you love a baby? A baby and a small child can't do anything for you. What about a pet? Why do you love your cats? Why do you love your dogs? Why do you love pets? They can't do anything for you in terms of serving you, but you love them because they are. You know, you are a person because you are. You're a person that's been created by God. You're on this earth. You are worthy just because you are. You don't have to give anything back to be loved. You don't have to give anything back to be worthy. You are a person of worth just because you are a person of worth. It just comes with you. And that's the way it is, of course, with everybody. But we don't stop to think of that. If we've been abused, we think that the only way we're worth something is if we're creative, if we do something good for other people, and our worth is based upon what we're giving out for other people. And what we tend to feel, and this is incorrect, we tend to feel that our only worth is in what we're doing for somebody else, or what we're giving to somebody else, or how we're caring for somebody else. And we need to stop thinking that. If you were a paralyzed person, if you were not able to move, if you were not able to do anything for somebody else, that doesn't mean that you're not a worthwhile person. You're still a worthwhile person, just because you are. And that's the way it is. We love children because they are. We love our pets just because they are. Now, you can argue that children and pets do give back, and to a certain degree they do, but it's nothing that you would ever depend upon. When my kitten or when my cat was getting elderly and she wasn't able to do things, did I stop loving her? Of course not. I thought she was the best cat in the world. And I kept telling people I have the world's most perfect pet. But could she do anything for me? No. But did it matter? No, because that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at her as a creation that is something that I love because I love her. And that's the way it is with pets. And it's the way it is for elderly people, for children, for relatives. You love your relatives. I used to really love my students, in the sense that I wanted the best for them. I wanted to help them get to the best that they could be. I cared about them. I cared that they did well. I cared that they were taken care of. I cared that they were in families that were stable. And believe me, when I was a school counselor, I saw many, many students who would come to me sometimes daily because they didn't have a stable household. They didn't have anyone to care for them. And I kind of became their mother figure. They would come and sit down and we'd talk every single day. And I welcomed that because I wanted them to feel that they were people of importance, which of course they were. And I wanted to show that to them by my behavior toward them. And I did it with all of my students. I used to bring in food, so if students didn't have enough money to buy lunches, they could always come to my office and eat. I kept non-perishable things. There was always peanut butter and bread and crackers and soup and so forth, and powdered milk and juices, anything that they wanted that I could bring in and store there. And when I had other jobs and I was working with other people, usually students who never had very much money, I used to always invite them into my office. You're hungry, you come in and I will have food for you. And I did it for all the students on campus. It wasn't just my own personal students, but anybody who needed it. I welcomed them. And this is the way that we show our care for other people. But the reason we show our care for other people is that they're worth it, They're human beings and they're important. So now I've gotten off on my soapbox. Let me continue. The problems that you have when you are feeling badly about yourself, they all intertwine. And if I were a person who was abused, and I'm not, but if I were, I might say, why would anybody want me? I'm no good. I'm not creative. I can't give back. I can't do anything. And I'm afraid of being left. So you get a mishmash of all of these symptoms which overlap. But what I want to go into today are the fears and the emotions that we have. So I'm going to kind of skip over. This is like a second segment of what happens to us when we're abused. The fears and the emotions. We have gone into the false belief, feeling that you're not worthy, feeling that you have no worth, feeling that you can't give back. Now we're going into the fears and the emotions. I'm going to read them off, then I'm going to take them one by one. And remember, this is also a mishmash. When I say that, I mean they kind of overlap, they kind of intertwine with each other, one leads to another, or they kind of combine. So we really can't consider them to be completely distinct entities. What we have to realize is that they're all interfocused here. Guilt. Well, why would a person feel guilt? I've already mentioned with children. Guilt is when you feel that you're at fault for something. Now, there is such a thing as true guilt and false guilt. True guilt is when you really have done something, and that's forgivable. You need to make amends for it, or you may need to apologize or something like that. But most of the guilt that people who have been abused feel is false guilt. And you're blaming yourself for things which are not your fault. But let me just read this down before I get into deeply into any one of these. Guilt, the fear of punishment, anticipatory fear, the what-if fears, fear of loss of control, that is you losing control, anger, depression, fear of your emotions, being depressed, fears of abandonment, fears of what other people will think of you, feeling that you are never going to be good enough, fear of going through your emotions alone, that's a big one, we'll get into that, insecurity, the need to be liked, expecting the worst at all times, reliving your fears and reliving your past fears, and that's a big one too, we'll get into that, the fear of making decisions, and going and feeling lonely. Loneliness, I think, is even worse than depression. Depression you kind of fall in and out of, or at least most people do. It can be cyclic, but loneliness is that abject feeling of being alone, no one around, no one's going to care for me, I don't have anyone I can rely on, I just feel so lonely. There's a different quality to loneliness than there is to depression. Depression, I almost think, is a little easier to handle than loneliness, but that's just my personal opinion, and some people may well disagree with me. So that's all right if you want to disagree. So let's take and go through these one at a time. Guilt. What are you guilty for? You're not guilty for the abuse that you suffered. You're not guilty because you're a human being. You're not guilty because you're suffering. You're not guilty for any of that. You will feel that the abuse that you have suffered is your fault. Somehow you did something wrong. You didn't do things right, and so therefore you are being punished because of whatever it is that you imagine that you've done that's not right. And you feel guilty over everything. You dropped the teacup and it broke. Okay, I would say, big deal. You know, unless it's a part of a very rare set, you can always get more teacups. Don't be worried about that. I had one of my little nephews come in. He had stepped on something that I had and kind of cracked it. It was a heating unit, and you put it over it, and it would kind of throw the heat into the middle of the room, and this is what I wanted. And he stepped on it, and he cracked it, and he was so frightened to come to me to admit that he did it. And he was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And he came to me and he says, Auntie Pat, he's just really scared to death. I think I broke it. And I said, don't even worry about it. I've done that 100 times. It's so easy to do. Don't even think about it. You could see, oh, he was just so relieved that he wasn't going to get punished. You know, we're human beings. We don't have to be punished for everything that we do, even if we made a mistake. We can usually fix the mistake, and even if we can't, it's forgivable. So you don't have to worry about every single thing that you do, that it's going to make you guilty of something. We just are living, and I'm sorry to say this, but we are living in a guilt-ridden society. By that, I mean, if something happens, someone's got to be to blame. You know, someone's always got to be the blame for everything that happens. That's why we have liability insurance. Well, I expect doctors to occasionally make mistakes. I expect everybody to occasionally make mistakes. If they do, so what? I mean, it's just a part of being human. That doesn't mean we take it lightly, but it's not the end of the world either. So this guilt that we feel, true guilt where we really do need to do something about it, in the sense of even maybe just an apology, or giving something back, you know, making recompense for something, or admitting that we did it, and it's, as I say, for the most part, it's very forgivable, and we don't have to worry about it. The true guilt is we have to fix it if we can. False guilt is when we are blaming ourselves for things that really don't matter. Is it my fault that my parents divorced. I'm using that as an example. My parents did not divorce. They had a good marriage. But supposing you're a child, is it my fault that my parents split? No. Is it my fault that certain things are happening in the economy? No. Is it my fault that my family is dysfunctional? No. You see, you're a part of it, but that doesn't mean you're to blame for it. So we need to get off that hunch that we have that whatever happens, I'm to blame for it. And so, I mean, we can have a lot more peaceful lives if we realize that we're really not responsible for all the things that we blame ourselves for. If you look into your life, I don't have a list with me, but if you look into your life, think about the various things that you feel guilty about. Okay, I'm diabetic. Am I at fault? No. My father was. My grandmother was. It ran in the family. But people who have an excessive guilt about themselves will say, well, if only I'd exercised, if only I'd eaten a certain way, if only this, if only that. It's not your fault, it's in the genes. If your parents were diabetic, there's a 50% chance that you're going to be too, especially if your father had it. That's what I've read. So therefore, that's not your fault. If it's a family thing that's going on, that's not your fault. If you have certain medical issues, is that your fault? Probably not. You don't cause illness. You get illnesses, but it's not your fault if you have them. So we have to get off the guilt. The fear of punishment is the next one. Fear of punishment is when you feel no matter what you do, it's going to be wrong and you're going to be punished for it. Should I take a course I may fail? Well, if I do fail it, if it's my fault, technically it might be my fault if I fail a course, but if it's a course I didn't understand, it may not be my fault. So we tend to think of ourselves as if we make changes, and if something happens as a result of the change that doesn't seem to be positive, we blame ourselves, so we feel guilty, but we fear that we're going to be punished for it. There are a lot of people who are fearing anything that they do, any decision that they make, any problem that they have, somehow they're at blame for it and they're going to be punished. Somehow that punishment is there. And where that stems from, of course, is that part of the abuse as you were growing up was that you were constantly punished for things. And you shouldn't have been, but you were. Some mistakes are just mistakes. Some things that happen are just things that happen. We don't have to place a lot of moral judgment on a person because they're having a problem. You do not have to place a lot of moral judgment on yourself unless you truly are guilty. But the problem comes in the fact that you're going to feel guilty whether you are or whether you're not. This is where therapy becomes most helpful, because the things that you feel so guilty about that are not your fault, you can discuss with a therapist and they can point out to you, in what way did you cause this? There's no way that you caused this. Your parents beat you up. There's no way that you caused it. They had their problems, they took it out on you. If you were the scapegoat in a family, you got all the punishment. Everybody blamed you for everything. That's what being a scapegoat is. So they would blame you if something went wrong. They would blame you if they didn't have enough money. They would blame you for everything. And then you internalize that, and you believe that you're as guilty as what other people say you are. And you're not. And that's a part of the abuse, just absorbing into yourself the things that people think you're guilty for or your dysfunctional family says you're guilty for, and then you suffer that. You know, I'm too stupid. I don't know enough. I can't read well. Therefore, I'm not worthy. I'm going to be punished. My issues and my decisions are not going to be right. I'm going to make a fool of myself. I can't do this. But you see, what you do is you cut yourself off from all creativity. You're not willing to take a chance. You take a chance, it may work out, it may not work out. If it doesn't, you learn something from it and you go on. You don't have to forever feel guilty about that. You're not going to forever be punished for something that you've done. Now, there are some things where you make mistakes. You have to be forgiving of yourself. Other people can be forgiving of you. Why can't you be forgiving of yourself? It doesn't mean you haven't done anything wrong. There's no such thing as a perfect person. But even if you've done and made mistakes, it's still forgivable. And you don't have to forever just be under a load of guilt and a load of punishment. Anticipatory fear. That's usually tied in with a real event. Supposing I'm terrified of going to a dentist, then if I know an appointment is coming up, I'm going to be fearful of it. Oh, this is going to be a terrible appointment. I'm going to be in pain. They're going to say I'm not taking care of my teeth. They're going to do terrible things to me, and I will sit and I'll worry and worry and worry about that appointment coming up. But it is a real appointment. It's not something that I'm thinking about in a year from now I'll be at a dentist and I'll be afraid. It's a real event. I'm going to a doctor, I have a lump. I just know that it's cancer. Now, it might not be. It's probably a cyst. But that's what you're going to think. I know that I'm critically ill. I'm going to die. It's just the anticipation of it, of a very real event. But that real event usually doesn't turn out to be near as bad as what you anticipate. You anticipate the worst, but that doesn't mean the worst is going to happen. One of the things that you can help yourself through this anticipatory fear is that when you get it, oh, I'm afraid of this event happening, I'm afraid of flunking that test I've got to take. It takes on a life of its own. The fear is very, very real. It's very, very powerful. And what you can do to help yourself is to tell yourself anticipatory fear usually is much stronger than what the actual reality is. I go to the dentist, do I have anticipatory fear? By the time I get there, the fear is gone. Because I'm no longer anticipating it, I'm actually there. And when I'm there, there's no anticipation because it's not a future event that's going to happen. It's something that I'm doing now, and I'm there, so nothing is anticipatory. So you go to the doctor and you've got the lump. You find out it's a cyst. And you're thinking, why was I so afraid? Why did I worry so much? But that's what anticipatory fear is. And if you have that, if you're afraid of specific events and really afraid that awful things are going to happen, tell yourself that anticipatory fear is usually not real. It's much stronger than it needs to be, and a lot of times it's you are reliving something that happened to you in the past, and it's coming out as a fear that you have now. And that's a whole nother segment I'm going to be going into later. How anticipation is based upon past events. Now, we are kind of running out of time, so I will close it off here, but I want you to understand what the anticipatory fear is. It's a powerful, strong fear, usually of a real event, sometimes not, but usually of a real event, and it's much stronger than it's supposed to be, much stronger than it needs to be, and if you tell yourself that, you know you're going through emotions that are much stronger than what the actual situation calls for. And if you can trust yourself and tell yourself that and believe that, that'll help to reduce that fear. Now I'm going to close it here, and we're going to continue with this list on the next segment. Please join me then.